Russia has unleashed its largest drone assault to date.
Russia says they are in retaliation for weaponized drone attacks yesterday.
The night sky over Ukraine pierced by the ominous buzz of drones and missiles as Russia initiated its largest aerial offensive since the invasion began.
Russia's air campaign is no longer about dogfights and flashy fighter jets. What's unfolding right now over Ukraine is a new kind of aerial warfare that is quietly overwhelming the West, and most people still don't realise how fast it's evolving. In 2025 alone, independent analysts tracked over 33,000 low-cost attack drones launched by Russia, a jump from roughly 4,800 the year before, meaning Russia is now launching nearly 7 times more unmanned strikes than a year ago. In one peak week, Russia sent 355 drones and more than 80 cruise and ballistic missiles toward Ukrainian targets, forcing defenders to fire hundreds of high-end surface-to-air missiles just to stop them. Every interceptor cost hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, while each drone costs a fraction of that, creating a cost imbalance Ukraine can't win by current plans. Open source tracking shows that in a 10-week span in 2025, Ukraine had to destroy nearly 8,000 incoming drones, yet almost 1,000 still hit targets, damaging power grids, transport hubs, and critical infrastructure. This is a shift from classic air combat to a model built on volume, attrition, and industrial scale, and many Western defences are still planned for the old kind of war. Keep watching until the end, because this video is going to expose what the West is ignoring and why it matters more than you think. Russia's air forces have not been static since 2014. They learned hard lessons in Syria and more urgent lessons in Ukraine. Those lessons shaped procurement choices and tactical shifts. In Syria, Russia refined integration of airstrikes, long-range cruise missiles, and battle space surveillance, while also testing weapons under real conditions. In Ukraine, from 2022 onward, Russia moved to a model that relies on massed standoff strikes, one-way drones, and layered launches from land and sea-based platforms rather than sending large numbers of manned aircraft into contested airspace. The use of Iranian-made Shahed loitering munitions in large volumes and the ramp-up in long-range aviation activity are central features of this new approach. The Institute for Science and International Security, CSIS, RUSI, and other independent analysts report a sharp increase in Shahed launches and an expanded role for long-range systems. Those sources document monthly Shahed launch figures, the rise in Russian long-range aviation activity, and the operational emphasis on attrition by cost against Ukrainian air defences and infrastructure. To understand the change, imagine a scale. On one side were costly fighter operations that required air superiority and risked aircraft losses against integrated air defences. On the other side are cheap, expendable loitering munitions and missiles that can be launched from a distance, sometimes thousands of kilometres away, and which force an opponent to spend expensive interceptors and missiles to stop them. Russia has tilted that scale hard toward the expendable, and the West has focused too much on disrupting the fighter side of the ledger. The result is that Western training, procurement, and planning emphasise fighter-to-fighter and aircraft survivability, while underestimating how massed cheap weapons can grind down infrastructure, air defence inventories, and public morale. That is what Russia's campaign in 2024 to 2025 showed. A doctrine of attrition by quantity and attrition by cost that buys effect through numbers and persistence. Evidence for that shift appears in public damage assessments, numbers of launches tracked by open source monitoring, and official Russian statements about new deliveries of long-range bombers and loitering munitions. Independent monitoring by several organisations tracked dramatic increases in Shahed-class loitering munitions deployed against Ukraine after mid-2024. One analysis estimated a sustained monthly level of thousands of Shahed launches during the latter half of 2025, and other trackers recorded a large week-to-week cadence in 2024 and 2025, where numbers rose from hundreds to thousands when production surged. The human cost is visible in casualty tallies. From January to September 2025, reporting collected by major outlets showed hundreds of civilian deaths from missile and drone strikes. When a campaign is built on volume, every launcher, every flight, every strike is a pressure point on an opponent's economy of defense. Each Shahed that reaches a target consumes the defender's time, missiles, radar attention, and repair capacity. For defenders, the arithmetic is brutal: expensive interceptors versus cheap, mass-produced munitions. That arithmetic is not abstract. Officials in Kiev and Western capitals repeatedly warned that air defense stockpiles are finite and that they are being spent at a rate that outpaces resupply. Public analyses and policy briefings have recorded this mismatch. Concurrently, Russia has accelerated its modernization program for longer-range, higher-capability aircraft. Contracts and delivery reports indicate the introduction and planned serial production increases for platforms such as the Su-57 fifth-generation fighter and modernized Tu-160 strategic missile carriers. Those aircraft have two operational effects. One, they enhance Russia's ability to conduct standoff strikes, launch long-range munitions, and project pressure on infrastructure and logistics far beyond the immediate front line. Two, their production serves an industrial signaling purpose. Russia can field new platforms, even while sustaining high-volume drone campaigns. Public reporting and Defense Ministry statements in 2024 to 2025 make clear that Russia is pushing to increase production of Su-57s and to bring more Tu-160Ms into service, while also testing new engines and avionics to improve endurance and range. Those steps are not simply for prestige. They expand the toolbox for launching precision strikes at longer distances and complicate Western calculations on counter-air operations. If you are wondering how these pieces fit operationally, look at how Russia orchestrated attacks in late 2024 and through 2025. The pattern is clear. Use of cruise missiles and loitering munitions to hit energy, transport and logistics targets deep inside Ukraine, targeted use of manned aircraft to support ground advances or to deliver heavier payloads when air defences were suppressed, and reliance on electronic warfare and deception to blind sensors and create openings for swarms. Analysts at RUSI, CSIs, and other centres documented cases where a combined package, electronic attack, decoys, and massed low-cost munitions, overwhelmed points of the Ukrainian defence. The reports show clear instances where mass launches forced defenders to reveal missile stocks, burn expensive interceptors, and accept gradual erosion of critical infrastructure. This is not an accidental sequence. It is a campaign logic. Make the opponent spend resources at a rate he cannot sustain, then exploit gaps. There is another piece Western commentators often miss: the production and logistics backbone that makes this strategy feasible. Russia did not conjure thousands of loitering munitions by improvisation alone. It established logistical channels, both domestic and through foreign suppliers, that allowed for high-tempo launches. Open-source tracking and reporting indicate an industrial scale-up and procurement arrangements, some public, some obscure, that increased availability of key components and airframes. The Institute for Science and International Security and other trackers published sustained month-to-month data on the volume of Shahed-class UAVs entering the campaign, suggesting an established supply chain. This is a sobering point. Strategy is not only about doctrine and tactics, it is about the ability to produce and sustain munitions at scale. Russia's apparent success in that regard has direct operational consequences for its opponents. Western defense planning has concentrated resources on air superiority fighters, fifth-generation procurement, and high-end integrated systems. Those are vital, but the West has not matched the shift in enemy costs and tactics with a proportional increase in affordable, scalable responses. When a state like Russia chooses to wage war by outproducing defenders with cheap airborne weapons, the strategic solution is not only better fighters, it is also layered, cost-effective interception, mass short-range sensors, directed energy experiments, electronic countermeasures, and a doctrine that binds civilian protection, infrastructure hardening, and resilient logistics into the air defense plan. Several Western briefs and think tank analyses have warned that current approaches leave gaps. In public hearings and defense reviews, officials acknowledge shortages of interceptors and the expense of using missiles to down small drones. That is why analysts speak about the need to rebalance spending towards scalable counter-drone systems and to integrate passive defences. The core point is simple: defenders must change their provisioning to match the opponent's economics. Russia's use of electronic warfare and intelligence to support drone campaigns deserves special attention because it marks a tactical fusion that Western observers often underplay. Soviet and Russian military doctrine long emphasized integrated air defense and electronic suppression. In recent years, Russia combined those capabilities with swarms of unmanned platforms. Reports from Ukraine and independent analyses show repeated cases where jamming, deceptive signals, and radar suppression made it easier for loitering munitions to penetrate defences. The practical effect is more than an operational convenience. Electronic warfare lowers the cost of each strike by increasing the hit rate and reducing the number of munitions that defenders can intercept. That multiplication of effect amplifies the attrition strategy. Western assessments recognize the problem, but often treat electronic warfare as a separate technical domain, rather than the multiplier it has become when combined with massed loitering munitions and standoff fires. Another blind spot is how Russia uses strategic communications and legal framing to blunt Western reactions. When cruise missile strikes hit energy grids or transport nodes, Russia frames many operations as military necessity or as retaliation for strikes elsewhere. Those narratives have two practical consequences. They complicate the political calculus for countries considering escalation of direct involvement, and they shape public perceptions that wear on political will. Meanwhile, the physical reality is that infrastructure strikes force defenders to divert scarce interceptors and to spend political capital on urgent repairs. Journalists covering these events have documented both the tactical damage and the broader effects on morale and public services. The West must absorb that tactic as a combined arms move, not a side effect. Statecraft and industry go together. Russia has made clear investments in aircraft that matter for high-end strikes while simultaneously building capacity to deliver high-volume, lower-cost munitions. Those two tracks are complementary, not contradictory. Long-range aviation, represented by Tu-160s and modernised backbones, extends reach and complicates Western geometry. Fighters like the Su-57 are intended to regain conventional, competitive edges in contested airspaces and to escort or suppress defences where necessary. In parallel, massed drones and cruise missiles do the grinding work, pressuring defence stocks and infrastructure. This dual-track investment allows Russia to pick options, use high-end systems when needed, and burn cheap munitions to produce continuous pressure and attrition. Defence analysts in Europe and the US have noted both streams, but Western procurement has tended to emphasise the high-end aircraft track without matching the investment in scalable countermeasures to massed low-cost attacks. Let's take a look at some specific incidents that illustrate the logic on the ground. In multiple strikes across 2024 and 2025, attackers combined drone swarms with cruise missiles to overwhelm layered defences in Ukrainian cities and infrastructure hubs. Satellite imagery and local reporting confirmed simultaneous launch windows, damaged power stations and transport nodes, and the wide-scale use of Iranian-made airframes in Russian service. International monitors and open-source analysts tracked results, repeated blackouts, logistics slowdowns, and disruptions to fuel lines that materially affected frontline operations. These were not ad hoc strikes. They were timed, synchronized attacks with strategic intent. The data and imagery exist. Damage assessments from media outlets, satellite analysts, and independent trackers show repeated patterns. Those patterns underscore that Russia's air campaign is not merely tactical, but strategically aligned to degrade an opponent over time. This strategy has direct implications for NATO and European defence planning. NATO countries have spent heavily on air superiority and on advanced fighters that promise long-term dominance. Those procurements take time and money. What they often overlook is the cost curve created by massed loitering munitions. For defenders, the wrong response is to rely exclusively on expensive surface-to-air missiles to stop every threat. That approach drains budgets and risks running out of interceptors. Instead, effective defence needs distributed sensors, cheaper interceptors, active protection for critical infrastructure, layered passive protections like redundancy and rapid repair, and investments in directed energy prototypes for low-cost interception at scale. A number of European defence studies and NATO assessments have started to recommend exactly these adjustments, but implementation has been slow and patchy. The lesson is not new: match the opponent's cost curve, or be consumed by it. Many Western analyses have also underestimated how Russia can combine conventional air forces with proxy or foreign-supplied capabilities. The use of Iranian-made loitering munitions is a clear example. Those weapons were not domestically developed in large numbers at first. They arrived through procurement channels and then were adapted and integrated into Russian operational planning. Public reporting by military analysts documented where and when those supplies increased, and legal and diplomatic reporting tracked the signalling and agreements that made supply possible. This blending of domestic capability with imported platforms allows a state to conserve its own advanced stockpiles while leveraging mass-produced foreign systems for volume. It is a model that complicates sanctions and export controls because the operational effect is not only domestic production, but also the ability to source components through external partnerships. Analysts who study supply chains and sanctions compliance have flagged these vulnerabilities as key to understanding how the campaign scales. There is an intelligence lesson here as well. Western intelligence communities are strong on high-end capabilities, ballistic missile tests, new fighter deliveries, and the movement of major units. They are less practiced at detecting dispersed industrial networks, small factories, component flows, and quick-turn production sites that feed thousands of low-cost munitions into a conflict. Public open-source intelligence groups did excellent work tracking Shahed densities and launch rates, but by the time large numbers became visible, the supply chain was already in motion. That delay is not a scandal, it is a structural challenge. It means policymakers must pair strategic intelligence with industrial monitoring, port and logistics tracking, and financial flow analysis to see the full picture before volumes overwhelm defences. Several policy papers and internal defence reviews recommend expanding those monitoring horizons, but implementing such holistic coverage across allied intelligence agencies requires money and political coordination that often lags strategic need. Let us talk cost and industrial math. Interceptors like the Patriot or similar medium to long-range missiles can cost from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars per shot. A Shahed-style loitering munition can be produced for a small fraction of that cost. Multiply a few $100,000 per interception by dozens or hundreds of strikes per month, and you quickly exhaust budgets or inventory. The West tends to plan procurement cycles over decades. Adversaries can adapt production lines in months. This imbalance forces a rethink. For many defensive roles, cheaper countermeasures performed at scale are more cost-effective than relying only on expensive missiles. That means rapid procurement of ground-based air defense weapons with low per-shot costs, improved radar networks to queue them, and investment in non-kinetic systems. Public cost comparisons and defense economics papers that I have reviewed show this arithmetic clearly, and military planners have acknowledged the need to rebalance procurement away from only the highest-end interceptors. There is also an operational psychology in this strategy. Continuous strikes against infrastructure degrade morale and create pressure for political concessions. The effect is slower than a single decisive battle, but it can be more sustainable. Russia's leadership understands the political dimensions. Sustained degradation of energy and transport forces a government to focus on domestic needs, rebuild critical systems, and maintain public order. Western planners often measure success by frontline gains and losses, while Russia measures success in the cumulative depletion of systems necessary for sustained defense. That difference in measurement changes priorities and dictates different resource allocations. Coverage in the international press and statements from Kyiv and other capitals underscore that civilian hardship from strikes shapes political timelines and defense priorities. If Western policymakers ignore that, they risk underfunding resilience in favor of kinetic responses that miss the social and logistical targets of the campaign. Some will point to Western air defense successes and say the strategy fails. That is partially true. When defenders have time to prepare, build layered systems, and deploy massed interceptors and electronic countermeasures, many attacks are defeated. But that is a resource-intensive model. The key point is sustainability. Can a defender maintain that level of protection month after month under pressure? The evidence from 2024 to 2025 suggests answers. Attackers who can maintain launch rates for months or years force defenders either to exhaust stocks or to accept damage. Defenders with limited interceptors can rotate protection, harden key nodes, and restore services more quickly. Those who cannot face slow attrition. NATO and allied analyses on resilience and stockpile sustainability are increasingly focused on these questions. The policy response must therefore be twofold: prevent adversaries from sustaining attacks by degrading their supply chains, and also increase defender resilience through redundancy and cheaper countermeasures. Both are necessary. A third overlooked factor is how Russia uses legal and diplomatic pressure to blunt supply response. When strikes occur, debates on escalation and rules of engagement become politically costly. Allies hesitate to send certain kinds of interceptors or to strike production nodes if legal or political exposure is high. Diplomatic reporting and public debates show that these calculations matter. The practical upshot is that a nation can exploit political reticence to continue logistics and supply flows. Sanctions and export controls can blunt supply, but they are not instantaneous and often allow time for creative workarounds. Policy analysts and sanctions trackers have documented gaps between sanction announcements an actual interruption of supply flows. That space has been sufficient in several cases to maintain munition volumes. The lesson for Western policymakers is clear. Sanctions must be targeted, rapidly enforced, and backed by diplomatic unity if they are to cut the supply lines that enable massed attacks. That's all for today's deep dive into Russia's new air strategy. If you found this video eye-opening, make sure to smash that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more in-depth analysis like this. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.